I'm going to talk about, my talk's going to be about rolling out the asset framework. And that's me, Soudek. A lot of you already know me. It's end of April. It's my 25th year here at OSI. And I'm one of the original, I guess, architect and stuff for the asset framework. And a sort of a quick question is that for some of you may know that, most of you won't. You call it AF. There actually it was called something else when it first started. So you can ask me afterwards. Okay, so this doesn't work. That's good. Okay. There we go. Technology never seems to work for me. So, okay, so the agenda is going to be basically this. Over the years that I've been doing, rolling out, helping customers, kind of realization that everybody's doing things their own way, and we've never really provided a framework and a structure of things to do when you're rolling it out for an enterprise, right? So we're always focused on point solutions or helping one customer, but don't really have a methodology documented and presented to help everybody as a sort of a plan. And so we started doing that, putting together from some customer results, from some internal people, and started putting together the structure. So we're going to go over that today, what the sort of the framework is. So first, we're going to talk about like organizational structure. Next one, like a governance framework. Like what is the straw man for when I make changes and do things? What does it mean and how do I deploy it? And then template management, right? Talk about the templates, but who's responsible for them, how they should be deployed, how do you move them from one side to another or corporate, what does it mean? And also building out a hierarchy, things to consider, right? There's no, as Ellery showed before, he kind of had best practices. I really hate the word best practice because it implies there's one way to do it, right? And I would like to say there are good practices, and certain scenarios, these will be the best practice. In this scenario, these will be the best practices. So building out a hierarchy, what does it mean, what you should think about? And then I put AF best practices. Like I said, I hate the term, but I like to enforce that idea because people think about the practices of when you build AF. So I have 10 commandments that I've studied a long time ago that you should consider do when you actually apply AF. And then methodologies, what are the tools or things available to help you synchronize things from corporate and the sites with corporate and so on. So the first thing is organizational structure. So when you're deploying that, you can see there's really four teams that you should have, right? You have a steering team, which are the vision setters. You have a strategic team, which will take the vision and actually put it in action, right? So the vision setters are like, so this is the CEO or the main commander-in-chief of an army. Your vision in action, the strategic team, those are the generals and the different teams. And then you have the tactical team. So they tell, okay, captains and so on, you guys go now and apply these things. These are your different roles. You apply these. And the side team are the soldiers who actually go and do it, right? So strategic teams, what are each team will have defined roles and responsibilities or things that they should be responsible for. So strategic vision, so these are the people who are the sponsors for deployment AF. So if you go do an enterprise deployment of AF, you need to have people at the highest level who are the sponsors who say, this is valuable, important, I'm going to assign people's time and resources to do this properly, not to do something in the back alley or on the weekend, try to do things. Okay? And they're going to manage the relationship with OSI and so on, so they're the sponsor, effectively, right? The other thing that they'll also do is responsible, is to communicate across the whole organization what the different groups or things have done and why we're doing it, right? So, like the CIO or operational CEO and so on. The strategy team is the execution of the vision, right, that's been set by the company. And so they take the vision, and then, well, vision's nice, but that's like a goal, a set of goals. But what do I do? So I need to break that down into small chunks. So I have initiatives, right? One of the worst things you can ever do is say, like we also used to preach, oh, you have AF way back, and so you can now map all your tags to your assets. Stupidest thing ever, right? Maybe eventually you end up that way, but what you're going to end up doing is building all this stuff with basically a tag mapper, and you're going to spend years and years doing it because you don't really understand all your tags anyway. So it's a big effort, and have basically next to no value because the operator will still use the tags because they're looking at small things. So the value for the tags is for initiatives across the organization for specific purposes. So build initiatives, build out AF, templates by initiative, and then eventually, in several years, you'll have like MOL and others have AF deployed across the enterprise, mapping most everything and everything strategic. Right? Okay. Identify value opportunities, right? So basically, if I'm going to initiative, why am I doing it, right? So yeah, I'm an engineer. I like technical stuff, and so it's next shiny object is great, but don't do it if it's not worthwhile for something just because I like it. Right? So what is the value, and then prioritize what that is. Right? And then of course, then you decide: do I need pilots? How do I roll it out? Right? So I need to roll out these pilots and the vision of which initiatives I'm going to do. And then the other important part is this PI system governance. Right? So that's going to vary somewhat by companies, but we studied a document, and I'll show you later, on putting a straw man of what that means, what we think that means based on some customer input and what they've done and what we think. Okay? And then, of course, the documentation and communicate value and define training plans and all those things. So they are the people who go to bridge the vision with the technical teams. So the tactical team is going to now actually execute the initiatives that have been handed out, that these are the important things we're going to do. How are we going to actually execute them, right? So how do I roll out PI? How do I synchronize things? What do the people need at the sites or at the corporate, wherever the initiatives are being done? What do I need to do there? They're going to be responsible for the master AF structure. That doesn't necessarily mean the hierarchy. It's the structure. So it's the master templates, the methodology, the naming conventions, those kinds of things, right? They're going to have access rules, security, those kinds. So they want to maintain that and make that a standardized thing across the organization, right? The other part of it important is that you ensure that you keep applying the standards. So some of you, or all of you have probably here and had PI for a long time and before AF, and almost all of you will have naming convention, for example, tags that use so many standards that you have no standard practically, right? So that's very important here. Then you don't want to get in the same mess. So when I start building the templates and things, you start defining rules and methodologies that I maintain. Right? And then, of course, you also have the technical support. These guys also support the sites. So these are typically would be like an IT organization at the corporate and maybe also at part of the site. And then the site team are the ones who are actually responsible for getting the actual thing done, right? The initiative, the value back. So these are typically would be the operations guys, the engineers, the operators. Okay? And the key what's in here, usually the subject matter experts, the SMEs, are located usually at sites. Right? So somebody who's a specialist at, let's say, in refining for a coker, or somebody understands rotating quants, right? And they become the SMEs that are important, that they're going to be able to see feedback and actually maintain and do the templates and methodologies that will be used across all of the sites for that particular type of asset or piece of equipment. Right? There's also additional value opportunities at the local site, so you don't want to stifle innovation, right? So you have corporate, but there's also ancillary things that can trigger off that. So you have additional value opportunities that may come out of either the initiative that's been handed down, or ones that can be knocked on easily on top of that haven't been thought of, that may be specific to the site, maybe not. Okay? And then they have to execute the project team. And another part of it is you will have to have support too. So point person or people at sites that when people are using, they can go to as a sort of first line of defense, right? So the PI system governance framework, we started writing a document about a year ago, as I said, so it's available, you can give it to you, but don't expect it to be, oh, here's a blueprint and I can just follow it exactly and I've got everything there. but it's got basically the main bullets with some detail of what those things mean and how I should structure or think about creating a framework for deploying or maintaining the AF, the templates, and if I make changes, what does it mean? What do I need to do? How do I deploy? Right? If I'm deploying, what things to consider during the deployment that may impact people, and then decide what I need to do about those. Right? So it's basically a framework for the change of management of the process. Right? And it's going to be expanded and so on, right, as we go. So as we learn new things, and we'll make it better. One of the key things also in there, just like I just mentioned a little while ago, is define standards and best practices. Right? So now the point of AF, or one of the points of AF, is to create a common language that you now don't have with tags, pretty much most of the time. So that means don't call inlet pressure for a pump or IP in one, or in press in another one, so on. So define a naming convention methodology that you're going to have, and then it's maintained by the strategic team. Okay? And of course, then also define security access. We already talked about that. And then standardize the architecture. Right? So as we go a little bit later on the presentation, it's kind of showing what are the different settings, like a staging environment, development, and so on. But all of those should have a standardized way of doing things, and not just ad hoc installed and put in there. And one of the most important pieces there is create a process, because internally this becomes a project, right, and a maintenance thing. So you got to create an approval process. When I make a change, who's responsible? What are the way to test it? When I deploy it, what do I need to do to alert people or notify and so on, right? So, and that's not going to be perfect, but that's the things to consider and to work on as part of this governance document. Okay? In here also the guidelines and documentation. So going to take that document and develop guidelines and recommendations for your particular deployment of AF or the initiatives. Right? Always also define like the project, the scope. Right? That's still typically, you guys do projects. So define the scope, why am I doing it, what is going to be done, put timelines, and what are the deliverables as well. Right? And I'm going to measure the success of it. Okay? And the key also, the bottom line, that because you're going to have to show, if I did this and there's going to be a change in value, how am I going to document that value? What is my baseline before I start, right? So that's important too, because then you're responsible to get to the vision team to say, yeah, we did this, and this is the delta, right? Whether sometimes it's not possible to do it in hard dollars, because I've saved somebody's time that used to take to do reports and do this, and it took a week to do it every month, and now they can do it in a day. Well, how do I value that? I could value the person's time and money, but maybe they do much higher value things now that actually have a bigger delta. Right? So decide how you're going to value that and stick with it. Support considerations. There's really like three categories there in the resource pool. Right? So learning resources, so you can leverage Pi stuff, but there's also people have built also that internal, right? Whether they link to the documents we have, but they also add that additional ones could be specific to the company or the site. Testing environments are critical. Right? I've had several times customers who are actually using the production environment to deploy stuff and test it directly on there, which is not a good idea. And then also create some samples. So sample AF structures or sample templates for people to get going. So we kind of have some of those studied with our sort of template kits that we put up there. So some things like that for new people to kind of just see how some things are done, so they can play in their environment from the sandbox to figure out, to give them a starting point. Not just here's a blank sheet and go and figure it out and go look at manuals and help files to figure things out. Make that accelerated by creating some of these resources. And then the typical roles and responsibilities. So this is more than just security. That certain people like SMEs, you'll be responsible for this. You guys can have a sandbox, but if you develop certain things, there's a process to go through to deploy to the main site and so on. Okay. So, IT, OT. Typically, in the past, almost always, because we say we're an infrastructure, and we are, but it also then pigeonholes us into, when you talk to the CEOs and OT, they go, well, so you're the database is compute and so on, go and talk to IT. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is IT doesn't know, and doesn't, in the past, hasn't really communicated with the OT what they really need. So we had people build stuff in IT, great things, and then OT said, I'm not using it, because it doesn't do the things I want. That's kind of sometimes like we do with our developers, that they sometimes build things and I go, well, yeah, it's great, but you didn't do it in a certain way that make it useful for me to use it. Right? So you need a merging of both. So here's what I kind of look at as broadly the ideas for what are the roles for the different groups that should work together. Right? So as I said, the IT would be things like the standards, the security, the governance document, how do the rollout, the procedural things, and making standards, testing to make sure that the system doesn't crash when somebody puts in a new calculation, things like that. The OT, well, I know build hierarchy because the hierarchy may need to be supporting reporting or may support like OEM projects and things like that. So I know what I want out of it. I also define the templates. IT doesn't know the template. A template is not just here's a list of everything and just map it to like with a pump or an exchanger, and I've got 1,000 attributes, I've got things mapped. Are they useful? I'm not sure. So the templates are built, as I said, for initiatives, and the subject matter experts or engineers should be the ones responsible for the content of what they should contain in terms of content or calculations or methodologies. And the other part is smart elements. You'll see that in my best practices for it's a key one. So AF is not just a data directory. Because if that's all using it for, it's got low value because there's a lot of time to map things and then you get some aid, but you're not really using the leverage of that, and you're still doing the old way where you're doing calculations that should be done at the lower level possible at point application. So now you're getting sort of the Excel hell again. My reporting services is using one way to filter or do a calculation, and my data science is using another, and so on, where all of those should be the same. So like an efficiency of something, well, that's an inherent part of that asset. So there's one way to calculate it that you decide, but if you're going to deploy it to the end solutions, then you guarantee you will going to have it done differently. Absolutely guarantee you. Right? It will be done differently, and you'll never catch it. So now you're actually looking at different versions of the same truth for the same calculation. Right? So why use templates? So I think that probably you're convinced that even if you have things that appear not to be only like one or two of the same thing, it depends how you look at things, right? And I'll show you a bit later that sometimes everything in your plan could actually be based on one template for a certain initiative, right? So you may think that you have different equipment, but I could actually go to your plan, and for a certain initiative, I could say, no, everything's the same template. Right? It depends how you look and what the initiative is. The good benefit is that some of you may or not use it, the auto-create PyPoint. So that's not as useful for people who are not evergreen, but it's useful when you're doing calculation, new things. So you now standardize a methodology for naming based on, I'm going to create tags from calculations that I'm going to store for efficiency and make it easy, deployable. And I'm going to create a naming methodology so that I have a standard now, at least for my outputs. Right? That makes it easier. And then I think Ellery mentioned it too on the event frames, the template inheritance. That's a key, right? Because that way you can create differences between assets that have similarities, but they have differences. You don't want to go too crazy that create an inheritance tree, 50 deep. But the other part that you'll see, the inheritance is also becomes important for I've got a corporate standard for certain assets at the top as a template, but the variations at each site I still want everybody to use the exact same template for certain things. So I use inherited templates to extend or override things at a local level, but I can still maintain a standardized set of templates at the top level that is the corporate standard methodology or the tags or attributes for that asset. Okay. I can't, get the subject matter experts, right? So I used to do stuff with caretakers and reformers, right? They're the ones who know how that thing operates and what they want to see and how they want to see it. And calculations that go into it that they do in a spreadsheet or somewhere else. They're the ones who should be building and maintaining the methodology. Not deploying them, right? That's still the strategic is going to do that, but they test out, and this is what I need. Here it is, and make sure it follows the standards, it's tested, and then deploy it. Okay? And again, you can see the whole thing, the defined standards, right? So naming conventions, derived templates, analytics, things that you're going to do. When you build a hierarchy, you're actually going to end up with more than one hierarchy. Right? For good deployments of AF, it's not one size fits all. Now, you're not going to have 20 or 30, but you might have 4 or 5 for different purposes. As an example, sort of a typical one that's very clearly defined, I can have a main hierarchy that follows something like an S95, those are familiar, ISA S95, that defines like an enterprise, area, unit, and so on, right? And that's great for like a process engineer looking at the plan because it kind of follows what the plan does in like a PFD diagram. But I want to now do production reporting. Well, that's the terrible structure to do reporting of because the stuff I need is in 50 different places down at different levels. To do a report on that, it's going to be so inefficient and so hard to do that I'm not going to even do it. So I create another hierarchy that actually has templates for materials and production that doesn't look anything like your assets. Right? So, and then also create views. So I can have my hierarchy, but now I talked about a company yesterday. Let's say you have a typical thing now, maintenance of precious equipment, rotating equipment, or things that are very expensive. Well, I have them now all across my plant or my other plants. And let's say I'm responsible, the SME, for the maintenance for these rotating assets. What do I do? Do I have to go and navigate? And this is going to be a mess. So I create a view and reference all of these like asset run templates against that view. So now I have all 500, 600 things in one place from all the plants. And I can then do roll-ups and calculate and act like a small hierarchy specific to my view. So it's like kind of like a view with for those of you who do like relation databases, right? I create a view. I have my own structure that could be this big schema of hundreds of tables, but I'm interested in this view. So somebody writes you a view or a script, and you get this nice table with everything in it. That's what views are in AF with references. Okay. So some considerations to think about when you're building a hierarchies is, again, keep to a standard. So I'm going to build an S95 or whatever standard is. So every level is a defined thing. Right? So let's say you have a hierarchy of like 5 or 6 deep, and level 3 is a unit. You never, ever, even now, as I'm at the place where I don't really have a thing called unit here, I still define a unit in the other template, whether it's a fictitious one or not. Every level should be the exact same type object, right? That's a standard. Even now, for some places, it may not actually have any attributes or any necessarily like use, but it's very useful because for maintenance and for be able to referentially go up and down a tree without knowing what I'm looking at. So to create these ways of doing it without understanding who my parent is, what the name is, and so on. I can do that if I have a defined hierarchy and a defined standard. So it's very important, right? And you can then define how to group it in different ways. So there's not one right way. So you could do things like by geography or business unit or types of assets, right? Or initiatives. So that could be very useful too, right? So CBM initiatives, so I have that as a child element. So under every main things, I'm going to have a CBM where I do certain things. Right? So here are my 10 commandments. So thou shalt use, actually, those of you seen, I forgot now the movie, but it came out and had pizza boxes. Right? History of the world, thank you, yeah. And he had the pizza boxes come out there, and they had these 10 commands on the pizza boxes. So use templates. Pretty much all of our visualizations or things we do are keyed off templates. Even if I have one of them, I still create a template. Right? Okay. Element hierarchy, follow standards. We just talked about that. Different views will make your life easier. Right? So I have a main hierarchy, one or two hierarchies, but then I create views for specific things because I group effectively things in one place that will be scattered across your hierarchy. So views are good. Right? Categories should be used everywhere for everything. That's my rule. Right? So attributes, elements, tables, analytics. Reason why is manifold, right? It's very simple. It's just a label, but for searching, it becomes like an index. Right? It's a visualization thing too, so that I can now group things. So like in Vision, I may have 500 attributes. I group them. I say, oh, these are the things for Vision or a CBM, and I just drag the group over. Right? Right? So it becomes easier for visualization, grouping, but also for reporting or querying. So categories will help you. Get to know Pi Builder. So those of you who don't know what Pi Builder is, that's an add-in to Excel that's also a replacement for the old SMT to build Pi tags as well as AF structures. So those of you who actually build the structures in the Pi System Explorer, well, that's great when you do one or two, but if you're trying to do 10,000, guarantee you're going to get really tired of clicking and copy and paste. It's not very useful. Okay? Defaults are not your friend. So my rule is that we provide some defaults in there. I never, ever use the defaults because they will get you in trouble when you least expect it and you won't know about it. So an example of that would be Pi tag data reference. Right? So I have an attribute, and I'm going to see the attribute, let's say, in kilograms. And my Pi tag, by default, will become, oh, default is kilograms. And I go, yeah, that's true. It is in kilograms. So it's OK. Now, later on, I deploy it and say, you know, I didn't want kilograms. They were screwed up. It should be 1,000 kilograms because the numbers are big. So my attribute should be showing 1,000 kilograms. Well, guess what happens now? Because it was default, it says, oh, the Pi tag's in 1,000 kilograms. Now you get a value that's actually 1,000 off, right? 1,000 times smaller because it doesn't do the conversion. So set a Pi tag, have your unit of measure, click the default and explicitly say, yes, it's in kilograms, right? As an example. So defaults, this is kind of like on other things where people try to help you too much, like on the autocorrect, right? It's useful sometimes, but most of the time it's a pain in the butt, right? Because it sends out the wrong thing, changes it, and he continually fixing the stuff that it's fixing, right? So I kind of like it for some things, but usually hate it, right? And string builder and event frames are your friends, right? So string builder is a data reference that helps you actually manipulate not just strings, but also values for certain things that you can't use a formula for other things because it's not a Pi tag, for example. So I can reference from an event frame a value from an element if it's not a Pi tag, unless I use a string builder. Okay, as an example. Event frames, as I mentioned, the great presentation on that. The only thing I would also add in there is event frames, remember, are not just for exception things. I think people use them for like doing shifts, but basically think of event frames as creating views that are then useful for other analytics or BI reports, and so you're building dimensions. And they're just views, so I can delete them and recreate them if I made a mistake, right? So that's why I'm saying you shouldn't create events just because you create them. It's stupid. No, create them, and if you think I need them now, I can always backfill and recreate them based on new logic. So there is no reason to actually keep creating event frames because I think I might need them, because they're just views. You're not destroying data, you're making data. You can always recreate them. Now, it may take a little effort, but a lot better than saying, well, I've got all these huge amounts of event frames, and maybe in 2 years I'll use them, and it's bugging out your system for no reason. Right? Dashboard using your measure. So those of you from the old Pi tag world, we had engineering units, but they're basically totally useless because nobody used them, or they used 50 different versions for the same unit. So it became not very useful. In AF, when you assign an attribute, a unit of measure, that value now is not just a number, it's a value with a unit, which means I can easily convert to other units, right? So And now we've added some stuff in AF in 2018 last year, where you can now do class of units. So I can switch from, I have my own English to the new metric, and I have these classes that in the units of measure stuff that I can switch all of the things from one base units to other base units, just one by one. And this is the one I mentioned earlier, the bottom-up approach, right? So as an engineer, what do? I have assets, I have this, so I've got my heat exchanger, my pump. What do I know about it? I need to measure all these things, so I start creating templates down to the level of detail. But as I remember, I mentioned that I could go to your plan and say, well, if I approach it a different way, like another initiative, I can make every one of your units and assets look like the same template. Because I'm now looking at consumption or operation. Am I running in trouble? Am I running good? Am I down? Right? Am I using utilities? That's the same template for everything. Right? Some may not be using certain thing, but it's okay. And then I can look at more of an operational thing to say, how is my plant operating, like an OEE type? Right? So there's two approaches. One, as an engineer, get down the bottom and do detailed stuff on assets. But also think about as a business guy to say, well, what if I look at it from top level as a management totally differently, right? And to give you an example, sometimes those things can be much more money. So I remember back when I used to do a lot of stuff in refining, we had all these complex programs to optimize units and so on. And yeah, it was great, made money, but then there was a situation where the planners used to go, so what refineries do, that they have a certain crude slate, but a lot of times they say, I can then potentially buy on spot market, so ships or things coming by and it's available, I can buy it at a good price. Right? So those planners in a half an hour could make you $100 million or lose you $100 million for the wrong plan. And I'd save $500,000 on doing complex programs, right? So not that one's better than the other, but both approaches are useful, and sometimes we forget that these bigger things sometimes can have a huger impact and be actually much simpler to implement. And we've done this actually. Osvaldo Bascour and I put together some little plan, like a template to do this, and he's been going around to some companies like Vale and others and Barrick, and they actually applied it and they deployed it in a few weeks, and now they have an operational insight to it. And Norm Doucet from Vale is here, and he's a big pie champion. When they applied that, after I think it was like in 2-3 months, they now have the best, because they have an insight now, they have the best nickel recovery they've ever had in the plant. Right? And that's because they just use this top-down. Basically, am I running in trouble, in down a unit, so I can see, prioritize what's happening where and which unit, and effectively build a Pareto chart. Okay? And the last one is you should build smart templates. Smart elements. So what I mean by that is don't just use a tag mapper. So a lot of times I see AF attributes and everything's tag and there's no additional information, there's no calculations, that's it, right? So yeah, that's useful, but you're using, it's like saying, well, yeah, I'm going to go push the car, right? I've got a car now, I get in there and somebody pushes it, I'm not going to use the engine or this and that, right? So build smart elements, which means, to me, and it becomes a judgment decision, build things or put the calculations, analytics in the right place. So analytics are not all the same, right? So I'm totally opposed to when I hear things, let me just put the data up there, and I put a data lake, and I can do all of it there on a spreadsheet. Again, I think that's a stupid, because you're creating point solutions. So not that you can't do it, but why doesn't the object become smart? So as an example, if I give you the keys to my car, you could drive it. It's got wheels. I turn the engine. So that's the methods. That's the smart object. It's not, here's this Lego block of say, go rebuild the car and then you can drive. That's what the people wanted you to do, right? So so smart elements. We kind of talked about it. It's analyses. It's time series data. It's asset external data, right? It's create events, notifications. So. And again, this will vary. Sometimes you won't use some of those things or not, but this is what the subject matter experts need to build out what's important and how they can leverage. And effectively, all these things, like we call the analyses, real-time calculations, time series calculations. That's where Pi shines. leverage that, and then use the advanced analytics for things that we don't do well or don't do at all, right? So leverage and do both. Some additional practice, so enumeration. So Elliot mentioned that too, like for the reason codes. Very important. I used to do a lot of stuff with like maintenance, Pareto charts. And the biggest problem was always that if you had a free format to comment, where you'd get, again, 50 different reasons for the same reason. So how do you actually group those together? So you need both. You need your freehand to make comments, but then your enumerations to say, you only have these choices, because I'm going to look at those. I can categorize them and look at them, right? The other interesting one is I didn't used to do this either, is try to use distinct element names. Right? So don't just call it pump 1, and then over here, pump 1. Right? It works, it's okay, but the problem is now, think about the visualization and utilization later. Oh, give me all the pumps. Oh, here's all pump 1s. Now I have a problem. Oh, let me go to an attribute or somewhere else and find what it's related to. So you're causing confusion for the end user. So think about the end user and the visualization, whether it's a visual, like a vision, or it's a report, or it's a BI, right? Make your life easier, right? So try to make them distinct so you can understand when each element what it means. And also keep relation data in relation database, right? So don't try to, the AF tables are there to basically create views to help with some calculation. They're not a SQL Server or Oracle to handle minutes of records to do the stuff that you're going to die, right? People try to use that, and it's great, but then it overwhelms it, and it's actually one of those least efficient things that we do, right, in terms of performance. So use them sparingly, but they're useful. So I'd say not use them, but don't say, oh, let me just dump out and use it as a Oracle or a SQL database. So how do we synchronize things aside? So in the document, I have a little bit more detail on this, but it's, you already have mentioned, I'm missing one environment here, but you have a production environment, you should have a development environment, staging environment, and then a sandbox. Okay? And the production environment is, I'm running there, that's my deployed state. The staging environment is, some experts came up, and in the development came up with the sandbox and said, yeah, we've tested it out, put in development, and this is how we're going to deploy the template or the calculation, the methodology, new tree. Put in the staging, and the staging is an exact, or as an exact replica as possible of the production. Because when I put it there, I want to see, when I turn it on, is it going to, the analyst is going to die, or this is going to blow up, right? So staging and production should be almost the exact same environment, but separate, right? And again, like I said, some companies are actually using production, so they basically have a sandbox and went straight to production, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Right? Now, how to manage how do you manage the, say, template deployment from a corporate standard down to the different sites? And we're talking with Steve Kwan, who's the I guess product manager for all of these things. What I found, and he has found, is this is not a many-to-one. So in other words, let me synchronize from this side, this template with these, and then from here to here. Push them down. So templates maybe work on the templates that are on the corporate, and then they get pushed down one directionally, right? Because otherwise that other thing is too hard to manage, and you can't create a governance model to make that work properly, right? So from corporate, SMEs will work on those, and then those get deployed down. And then, as you said, the local sites for the differences can have inherited templates, which can override some properties or attributes, or add new ones which are specific for the site. But you still have the same corporate standard, right? The other key is that they define the process for letting changes. So, and we don't do that well at OSI. So somebody, IT or somebody's changed something, and I come in and like doesn't work. It worked yesterday. Nobody told me. Right? And what's the new thing to do? Where do I go to the new site, or why isn't it working? Is it a bug? So when I make changes, what is the process? Who gets alerted, or how? The methodology is very important, because you're going to lose a user, because they say if it doesn't work, right, one time, okay. Second time, I'm not using it because it's unreliable. Right? And again, subject matter experts. So don't work in vacuums. You need both groups working together. Right? How to promote the configuration. So basically, it's 3 methodologies: PySystem Explorer, AF utility, and then programmatically use the SDK. So this is how to promote. So PySystem Explorer, right, is a manual process, and it's okay and works, but I wouldn't necessarily use that as my main thing. So basically, what do? You open up the PSE, right? You export either a template or a group, and then over there you import it. The negative of it is that it works great. It's manual. You could probably PowerShell script it, but the negative of it is that it will not take deletion. So if I deleted something from the top template and put it down, it's only going to do new things or modifications of existing things. But if I deleted one, it'll still exist in the deployed template, right? So be aware of that. That may not be a big problem because you shouldn't be deploying a sort of ad hoc template initially and you're making lots of changes. You should already have a sort of base before you deploy, and then you're really adding things. So typically that shouldn't be a problem, but just to be aware of it. There are 2 AF utilities which are command line, so you can PowerShell script and so on, called AF export and import. And they basically work the same way. They create an XML file, but it can be totally automated, so you don't even touch it. You create a logic in a file, what you want that export to do, what you want the import to do, and you can run it. So we have people doing that. They're actually loading this and running it on once a day, just execute the script and update things. Right? And the last one is programmatic, right? So basically, that's the most powerful one. Also, by the AF import export still has the same problem about the delete, right? Because it only knows about updates. It doesn't try to interrogate the structure you have and to see are there changes. Right? So the AF SDK is the only way to make that totally bulletproof. So we've kind of dibble-dabbled on creating utilities and things. We don't have a tool that you can press a button and does it automatically. But it's not difficult to do once you define the strategy. And I've been working with several customers like Anglo Platinum and others who've done this, where they define a logic and they basically do have a button that they push that pushes it down. So the program is not that hard to do. It's more of the methodology. What do you do when? So there's a lot of if statements, like the flow diagram, what to do, and how to handle changes, how to handle alerts, and those kind of things automatically. Okay? So as a last thing, conclusion. Right? So you're going to need organizational structure and governance. And we've kind of known that, and people have been asking for it, but we haven't really supplied it, and we kind of started doing that now to help with that. And the document that I've put together with a couple of people, that's available, and we'll be updating it. I think it's on PySquare as a white paper or something like that. Again, define and follow standards. Absolutely critical. Give you a little. Sorry, I live in a house that for US it's old. It's built in the 50s, in the 1950s, and I always shudder when I have to go and something breaks. Like I need a new beam of wood, right? So for those of you who are not in the US, you can buy a 2x4 inches piece of wood. Well, what that means now, that's 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. Well, not on my house. It's 1 3/4 by 3 3/4. And then when I change a faucet, you wouldn't believe, like underneath the sink, you wouldn't believe how many different types of connection things there are. I had to go to the store like 10 times to get the right one, right? And that's where standards, if I have a standard, boom, I can do the right thing and deploy it, right? So that's very key. And then again, SMEs, so define the roles. IT and OT work together. SMEs should be the ones responsible for the content of the templates. Define and create the rollout process. So unfortunately, I wish we had some more automated tools. Hopefully, eventually we'll get there. But right now, there's at least things to consider, and we know what needs to be done. We just don't have a simple application that you can press a button and do that. And follow best practices. So basically, for those who don't wing it, have a plan. For those of you who are not English speaking, you want to understand, don't wing it basically means I just go and fly by the seat of my pants and do something, right? you have to have a plan, otherwise you're going to end up with the Excel hell and a mess. And that's me. So any questions? Yeah.
So I could be wrong, but you went over 3 different methods of exporting the asset framework and importing it into another environment.
Yeah.
I thought there was a Pi connector that did do that.
Yeah, you mean Pi to Pi, the Pi connector, yeah. Pi system connector, yeah. So it's, I don't know the status of that one. So that's why we took it off there.
The person that handed me the microphone is probably a good person to ask.
Yeah. So Steve can probably answer it, but one of the things that it still wouldn't do the full thing because it would do the thing partially, right?
Yeah, so I think what you need to remember with the Pi system connector is that it's kind of a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
Right? So depending on what you're trying to do, it may or may not be the correct tool for you. Right? So if you, so one thing I want to add to what Alicia said before is that if you're going, how many of you are here because you don't have AF and you don't know where to start?
Yeah.
All right, good question,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So, sorry, Alicia, I'm going to take 2 minutes of your time.
No, go for it.
So, you don't have AF, you want to get started. Why do you want to get started? Because you're trying to solve certain problems, right? So if you're trying to solve certain problems, why don't you build it so that you can solve those problems to start?
Yeah.
Right? If you're going to go write an encyclopedia, you're not going to go start from letter A and work your way downwards.
Yeah.
Necessarily. You might want to start with the ones you're most familiar with and solve the most valuable problems to start with. Consider the end user who's going to be using your AF model. Okay? If you have an operator who's going to be using your AF model in your visualization tool, consider what his view would be, consider how he would access the information and what information he's looking for. Do you want your operator to click through 15 levels in your AF hierarchy to get to the information that he needs? You don't. That's going to affect how you would build your AF hierarchy. Do you want your user to have to go to 3 different places in your AF hierarchy to get 3 pi points to put on a trend? You don't. You put those 3 pi points at the same level in your AF hierarchy so he can get to it immediately. So think about the problems you're trying to solve and what's the best way of solving it in AF following the 10 Commandments. How many of you have SAP? SAP. How much information in your SAP database do you actually use? 1%? Maybe? There's no need to build your AF from the very beginning to be a replica of SAP because, again, you're going to use 1% of it. That makes no sense. Only build out the pieces that you need to solve the problems that you want to solve, taking into consideration how your end users would leverage the information.
Yeah, that's exactly right, yeah. By the way, it's getting over there. So the answer to the AF was actually called SF for Sigma Find framework. So as part of a group that bought us, Sigma Find is a program to do mass and energy reconciliation for a plant. And the AF was really built to simulate that product into Pi directly. And then they said, well, let's make it more generic. So that's why it came AF. Yeah, sorry.
Don't be sorry. That's a fun trivia fact. So I'm really confirming what I thought I heard you say here, and I just want to get your head nod here. Rather than looking for some kind of auditing system to track when people are making changes in the AF database, you would recommend that it's much better to have a process to approve those changes in advance so that you know who made the changes because there's a process to do that. Is that correct?
Yes. And the key is to not to stifle innovation, give people a sandbox that they can blow it up or screw it up. Doesn't matter, right? It's not the test environment for like a sandbox is not a development environment. The development environment is more okay, I've put out some ideas, like trying to figure out how things work and test it out. Let me put in development that actually mimics the real one. I'm happy with it. Let's put it to the actual staging where it's actually as if I was putting into the main one to see what are the impacts on memory or performance or other things that I've never considered. Right? So development is really fixing. Yeah, I've worked out a new way to do a calculation or certain things or a CBM or whatever it is, and I've tested for that. The staging is how does it impact all the other things that are running. Right? But yeah, it's a process basically. Yeah, there's no magic bullet, and you already guys have processes applied. So just apply the similar things, and then use some of the technology to supplement that, but not try to replace. Because there's no. I've looked at this, and technology is great, but when it tries to do too much, it usually screws up or doesn't do anything very well, right? So use technology as a supplement for specific things, but not as a replacement so I can automatically automate. Maybe one day we can, but I've not seen it yet, right? It works great for a certain level, but then when it doesn't, you don't have control, right? So just consider that. So it's going to be, I think, a blend between using technology and automatic methods together with a process. And then hopefully eventually we'll get to the stage where it can be done. Yeah, we were over time, so I think it's lunchtime for you guys. So thank you very much.